They didn't laugh loud. That's what messed with me the most. It wasn't some big, obvious joke where you could call it out. It was low, under the breath chuckles, smirks, looks passed between grown men who thought they knew exactly who I was just by reading a few lines on a background report. I stood there in formation, boots straight, chin level, eyes forward, doing everything by the book, while my past got turned into entertainment. I felt it before I fully understood it, that shift in the air when people stop seeing you as a soldier and start seeing you as a story, a rumor, a mistake that slipped through the cracks. Someone had dug up where I came from, foster homes, a rough neighborhood, trouble when I was young, stuff I survived, not stuff I was proud of, stuff I thought I left behind the moment I raised my right hand and swore in. But there it was, back on the table, being passed around like it belonged to them. The veteran didn't say much at first. He didn't need to. Guys like him never do. He'd been in longer than I'd been alive. Combat patch on his shoulder, ribbons stacked neat on his chest, the kind of soldier everyone automatically listens to. When he leaned back and smiled, it gave the others permission. That smile said everything. She doesn't belong here. She's pretending. She'll crack. I kept my face blank. I learned how to do that before I ever learned how to fire a weapon. When you grow up bouncing between places, you learn real quick that reactions cost you. So I swallowed it. Every comment, every sideways look, every joke that danced right up to the line but never crossed it enough to report. Inside, though, something old woke up. Not anger, not yet. First came that familiar tightness in my chest, that reminder of being judged by people who never lived a single day of your life, but somehow felt qualified to define you. I could feel my hands clench inside my gloves. I forced them still. I wasn't about to give them what they wanted. Because what they wanted was a show. I'd seen it before. Teachers, cops, caseworkers, men who thought experience gave them ownership over truth. They expected me to snap, to mouth off, to prove I was exactly what they thought I was. The problem for them was this wasn't my first battlefield. It just had cleaner floors and stricter rules. That night in the barracks, the lights went out, but my mind didn't. I stared at the ceiling, listening to breathing, boots shifting, someone laughing quietly at a phone screen across the room. My name popped up in my head over and over again, attached to their voices. Not my rank, not my performance, just my past. That's when it hit me. They weren't scared of my mistakes. They were scared of what I survived. People who've had everything handed to them don't know what to do with someone who had to claw their way out. They call it baggage. I call it training. I didn't plan revenge that night. Not in some dramatic way. I didn't picture punching anyone or screaming my truth. That's not how real revenge works. Real revenge is quiet. It's patient. It's letting people underestimate you long enough to hang themselves with it. So I made a decision. I'd be invisible. I'd follow orders. I'd outperform quietly. I'd let them keep thinking I was the weak link, the risk, the girl with the sketchy past who didn't belong next to real soldiers. And when the moment came, because moments always come, I'd be ready. The veteran caught my eye the next morning during PT. Same smirk, same confidence. He ran drills like the rest of us, barking corrections, acting like the authority he believed himself to be. I noticed how he watched me, though, waiting, expecting failure, expecting me to fall out, mess up, or show that crack he was so sure was there. I didn't give him any of it. I kept pace, controlled my breathing, finished strong. When I passed him, sweat in my eyes, lungs burning, I didn't look back. That bothered him more than any argument ever could. I could feel it then, that shift. Not respect, not yet. Something closer to curiosity mixed with irritation, the kind that comes when a story doesn't end the way you expected. They still mocked my past when they thought I couldn't hear, still whispered, still joked, but now there was something else layered in, confusion. Because I wasn't breaking. What they didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that my past didn't make me fragile, it made me disciplined. It taught me how to read rooms, how to spot threats, how to stay calm when everyone else panics. It taught me endurance in ways boot camp never could. They thought they'd exposed my weakness. All they really did was remind me why I never lose focus. And that veteran, he had no idea that by looking down on me, by turning my history into a punchline, he'd just stepped into a lesson he wasn't ready to learn. This wasn't the start of my downfall. It was the start of his mistake. I didn't join the army because I loved war movies or wanted medals. I joined because I needed structure before my life went completely sideways. People love to romanticize service, but for me it was simple. I needed rules. I needed order. I needed a place where effort actually mattered more than where you came from. At least that's what I believed back then. Growing up, nothing stayed still long enough to feel real. One house, then another. New schools where teachers already had a look ready for kids like me. The look that says, keep an eye on this one. I learned early how to read faces, how to stay quiet when speaking would only make things worse. Survival wasn't dramatic, it was routine. Wake up, adapt, don't trust promises, keep moving. By the time I was old enough to choose something for myself, I was tired of being labeled before I even opened my mouth, tired of my past walking into rooms before I did. When a recruiter talked to me about the army, he didn't sugarcoat it. He said it'd be hard, said people wouldn't care about excuses. That part sold me. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted a clean slate earned the hard way. Basic training nearly broke me, not because I wasn't strong enough, but because it stripped away every defense I'd built. No hiding, no disappearing into the background. You mess up, it's loud. You succeed, it's expected. I watched people quit, people who had stable homes, supportive families, confidence handed to them from day one. Meanwhile, I stayed. Every push-up, every mile, every yelled command felt familiar. Chaos with rules is still chaos, and chaos was something I understood. When I graduated, I felt proud in a way that scared me. Pride was dangerous growing up. It made loss hurt worse, but I let myself feel it anyway. I earned that uniform, every inch of it. I believed that once I was in, once I proved myself, the past would finally shut up. I was wrong. At my unit, things were quieter but sharper. Nobody screamed like drill sergeants anymore. The judgments were cleaner, hidden behind jokes and experience. That's where the veteran came in. He wasn't officially in charge of me, but his presence carried weight. He had stories, real deployments, loss, pain, stuff you can't fake, and I respected that, at least at first. But respect only flows one way with people like him. He'd test me in little ways, question my decisions just a little longer than necessary, correct me publicly when a private word would have done the job, laugh when others laughed, always making sure I saw it. I told myself it was normal, that I just needed thicker skin, that if I worked harder, he'd back off. So I worked harder. I volunteered for extra details. I stayed late. I trained until my muscles screamed and then trained some more. I made sure my gear was squared away, my timing tight, my performance solid. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to make myself undeniable. Still, the jokes didn't stop. They'd talk about real soldiers and glance my way. They'd bring up trust like it was something you either grew up with or didn't. Someone once asked, half joking, if I was worried I'd snap under pressure. The veteran laughed the loudest that time, said pressure reveals who people really are. I kept my mouth shut, because the truth was, pressure had been revealing me my whole life. Hunger, fear, abandonment, violence. Those were my teachers long before the army ever showed up. What they called pressure felt like home. What really got under my skin wasn't the disrespect, it was the assumption. They thought my past meant I lacked discipline, loyalty, control. They couldn't see that everything I was came from learning those things the hard way. I didn't break rules because rules kept me alive. I didn't panic because panic never fixed anything. The veteran couldn't see that. Or maybe he didn't want to. There was this one afternoon, heat hanging thick in the air, when we were running drills. I nailed my lane clean. No hesitation, no wasted motion. When I finished, I caught his eye. For just a second, something flickered there. Not approval, not pride. Annoyance, like I'd messed up the script he wrote for me. He said nothing, just nodded and moved on. That silence bothered him more than my failures ever could have. I started noticing little things after that. How he watched me during exercises, how he'd push scenarios harder when I was involved, how he'd ask questions designed to put me on the spot, not to teach, but to test, to see if he could make me crack. I didn't. Every night, though, I felt the weight of it. Alone on my bunk, I replayed moments, wondering if I should have spoken up, defended myself, told my story. But experience told me stories are ammunition. Once you give people your pain, they decide how to use it. So I held on to it. What they never understood wasn't that staying silent was weakness. It was strategy. I was learning their rhythms, their habits, their blind spots. I was learning how far the veteran would go, how much control he thought he had, how comfortable he was looking down on someone he thought couldn't touch him. That comfort is dangerous. I didn't hate him. Hate is messy. I felt something colder, something clearer, a sense that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a system that let experience excuse cruelty, that let respect turn into entitlement. I wasn't trying to take anyone down. I was waiting for the moment when the truth would matter more than reputation. And that moment was getting closer. Things shifted after that. Not in a loud way, more like the air got heavier, like everyone felt something coming but didn't want to name it. The veteran started putting me front and center more often, and not because he believed in me. It was like he wanted witnesses, wanted proof that I was exactly who he thought I was. Every exercise turned into a spotlight. Every mistake, even the small ones everyone makes, got stretched out and examined when it was mine. If someone else messed up, it was a teaching moment. When I did, it was a character flaw. I could feel eyes on me constantly, waiting for the slip. The messed up part was how calm he stayed. No yelling, no obvious disrespect, just that controlled tone people use when they think they're being fair, but are really just being surgical. He'd ask questions with no right answer, push timelines tighter than normal, add pressure where it wasn't needed, then watch closely. I started realizing this wasn't about standards, it was about dominance. The more consistent I stayed, the more uncomfortable it made him. I could see it in how he tightened his jaw when I finished strong, how he'd move on too fast after I performed well, like acknowledging it would cost him something. He needed me to fail, needed his version of the story to be right. Others started picking up on it too. Not everyone joined in anymore. Some stayed quiet, some avoided eye contact. A few even started asking me questions after drills, low-key, respectful. That didn't help my situation. The veteran noticed everything. One day, during a field exercise, he called me out in front of everyone, said we were going to run the scenario again because some people need repetition. He didn't use my name, didn't have to. Everyone knew. I felt that familiar heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my posture steady. We ran it again. I executed clean, better than before, faster, sharper, no wasted movement. When it was over, there was a pause, just a beat too long. He looked at me like he was deciding something. Then he smiled. That smile wasn't friendly. It was the kind people wear when they think they've got another move lined up. He told everyone to hydrate and reset, then walked past me close enough that I could hear him say, real quiet, that pressure makes people show their true colors. Same line he loved to use. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was scared, because I was alert. I'd lived through enough to know patterns. When someone keeps pushing without results, they escalate. They don't back off. They look for a different angle. And sure enough, the angle came through my past again. This time, it wasn't whispers. It was framed as concern. He brought up mental resilience during a briefing, talked about how unresolved issues can resurface under stress. Didn't name me, but everyone felt it land. He talked about trust, about reliability, about how the unit depends on knowing the person next to you won't fold. I sat there, hands on my knees, breathing steady, while my entire history got dragged into the room without permission. That's when something inside me hardened. Because now it wasn't just disrespect, it was a threat. A quiet suggestion that I didn't belong, that I was a risk, that no matter how well I performed, I'd always be seen through the lens of who I used to be. After that briefing, I caught a few looks, curious ones, doubtful ones, the kind I thought I'd escaped forever. The veteran stood off to the side, talking to another NCO, calm as ever. He believed he was winning. What he didn't realize was that he'd crossed a line. I wasn't angry in the way people expect. I didn't feel wild or reckless. I felt focused, clear, like everything finally made sense. I saw the game for what it was, and I understood my role in it. If he wanted to test me, fine, but tests work both ways. I doubled down, not louder, not harder, smarter. I documented everything, times, scenarios, results. I made sure my performance spoke for itself in ways that couldn't be brushed off as luck. I stayed professional, calm, almost boring, the kind of soldier people forget to watch closely. Meanwhile, I watched everything. How the veteran cut corners when he thought no one noticed. How his confidence sometimes turned into complacency. How he relied on reputation more than preparation. None of it was dramatic, just human, just enough. There was one exercise, late afternoon, exhaustion heavy on everyone, where something went slightly wrong, not because of me, because of a rushed decision he made. Nothing catastrophic, just inefficient. I adjusted quietly and the team finished without issue. Later, I heard him take credit for the recovery. That's when I knew. This wasn't about me proving myself to him. It was about him protecting the image he'd built, the experienced veteran, the unshakable leader, the man who couldn't possibly be challenged by someone with my background. People like that don't handle exposure well. I started noticing cracks in how others responded to him, too. Small hesitations, second guesses, nothing open, but respect based purely on reputation doesn't age well when reality keeps poking holes in it. The tension kept building. Every day felt like a coil tightening. I could feel eyes on both of us now, measuring, comparing, waiting for something to happen. And something was coming. I could feel it in my gut. That same instinct that kept me alive before uniforms and ranks ever mattered. The veteran was going to push too far. He always did. People like him believe pressure is proof of strength. They forget pressure can also expose weakness. I didn't know exactly when it would happen or how. I just knew that when it did, I wouldn't flinch. Because I wasn't the same girl he thought he could break. And the moment he underestimated me one last time, that would be the moment everything flipped. The day everything started tipping toward the edge didn't feel dramatic at first. No alarms, no shouting, just another long day where the sun felt too heavy and patience wore thin. That's usually how things break anyway. Quiet, ordinary. You don't see the crack until it's already spreading. We were scheduled for a full evaluation run, multi-phase, physical, tactical, decision-making under pressure, the kind of thing leadership watches closely, the kind of thing that gets written down and remembered. The veteran was in charge of coordinating it, and I knew before we even stepped off that this one mattered. He made sure I was placed in a position where visibility was high, not leadership, but close enough to be noticed, close enough to be blamed. I could feel it the second assignments were handed out. He didn't look at me when he did it. He didn't have to. The message was clear. This was my test. The first phase went smooth, too smooth for his liking. I stayed sharp, stayed quiet, stayed locked in. When we moved into the second phase, that's when he started tightening the screws. He shortened timelines, changed instructions last minute, nothing illegal, nothing obvious, just enough chaos to trip someone who was already off balance. I wasn't. I adapted. I always do. It's muscle memory at this point. When plans fall apart, I don't panic, I adjust and keep moving. The team followed. We stayed functional, effective, clean. That's when he snapped. Not loud, not emotional, controlled. He stopped the exercise in front of everyone and said we needed to address an ongoing issue. His voice carried just enough to pull attention from every direction. People turned, watched. I felt the heat rise again, that old familiar sensation of being singled out. He talked about accountability, about how personal history doesn't disappear just because someone puts on a uniform, about how unresolved behavior patterns can surface under stress. He never said my name, but everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Then he looked right at me. He asked if I felt confident in my ability to perform under pressure. That question hit harder than any insult so far, because it wasn't really a question, it was a challenge, a trap. If I said yes, I'd sound defensive. If I hesitated, he'd have his proof. All eyes were on me, waiting to see which version of me would show up. I answered calmly, professionally. I said I was confident in my training and my performance so far. He smiled again. Then he said confidence and reliability aren't the same thing. That's when I realized he wasn't trying to break me privately anymore. He wanted it public. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the unit to start doubting me on his behalf. The exercise resumed, but the damage was done. I could feel it in the way people moved around me afterward. Not hostile, just cautious, careful, like they didn't know which version of me they were supposed to believe in anymore. I hated that feeling more than the insults, because I'd earned my place. Every mile, every drill, every sleepless night, and still one man's opinion carried enough weight to drag my past back into the present. Later that evening, word spread that leadership would be reviewing performance notes, that everything from the exercise would be discussed. My name would be in those notes, I knew it, and I knew exactly how he'd frame it, not as failure, as concern, as risk. That night, something cracked inside me, not in a way that made me reckless, in a way that made me done pretending this would resolve itself if I just kept my head down. I'd spent my whole life waiting for fairness to show up on its own. It never does. I sat on my bunk, boots off, uniform half folded, and staring at my hands. These hands had carried me through worse than this: hunger, violence, fear, loneliness. And now they were shaking, not from weakness, but from restraint. I realized something right then. He wasn't afraid of my past. He was afraid of losing control. Because despite everything he'd thrown at me, I was still standing, still performing, still gaining quiet respect. And people like him don't know how to handle a challenge that doesn't look like a fight. The next day, leadership reviewed the exercise. Feedback was given, neutral, carefully worded, no direct accusations, no praise either. Exactly the kind of gray space that lets doubt grow. The veteran watched me the entire time. Afterward, he pulled me aside, public enough to be seen, private enough to feel invasive. He told me I needed to be aware of how my background might affect perceptions, told me that trust takes time, told me that some mistakes follow you longer than others. I nodded, said nothing. Inside, though, something shifted permanently. I stopped hoping he'd change. I stopped trying to prove myself to him. And I started preparing for what was coming next. Because I could feel it, in the tension, in the glances, in the way leadership started watching us both more closely. The situation had gone too far to fade out quietly. There was going to be a moment, a turning point, something that forced the truth into the open. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be my past on trial. It would be his judgment. I went to bed that night calmer than I'd been in weeks, not because things were better, because clarity had finally arrived. I knew what I was dealing with now, and more importantly, I knew myself. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to let the system do what it always does when someone pushes it too hard. expose them. The twist didn't come with fireworks or shouting. It came the way real truth usually does, slow, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore once it shows up. It started with paperwork, quiet questions, side conversations that stopped when I walked into the room, the kind of movement you don't notice unless you're used to watching for exits. Leadership had been paying attention longer than I realized. That evaluation run stirred something up, higher than our little circle. Not because I messed up, but because too many reports didn't line up. My performance data said one thing, the veterans' commentary suggested another. When those two don't match, somebody starts asking why. I didn't know any of that at first. I just noticed the veteran acting different, tighter, less relaxed. He still wore confidence, but it didn't sit as easy on him anymore. He started double-checking things he used to wave off, showing up earlier, talking more, filling silence that didn't need filling. People like him aren't used to being questioned. The first real shift happened during a skills assessment, one of those controlled environments where excuses don't survive. Same standards for everyone, same observers, same clock, no room for storytelling. I ran my lane clean, not perfect, but solid, efficient, calm. When it was over, one of the evaluators nodded and made a note, simple, professional. The veteran stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaw set. He didn't comment. Then it was his turn. Nothing catastrophic happened, no big failure, just small things. Hesitation where there shouldn't have been any, a correction given too late, a decision that worked but wasn't optimal, the kind of stuff nobody calls out when it's coming from someone with his reputation. Except this time, someone did. An evaluator asked him to explain his choice, not aggressively, just neutrally. The veteran answered, but his explanation wandered. It leaned heavy on experience instead of specifics. I saw it immediately, that moment when someone realizes the room isn't automatically on their side anymore. Afterward, I caught a few looks, not at me, at him. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about my past versus his record. It was about adaptability, accountability. Who was actually operating in the present instead of living off what they used to be? The real twist came a few days later when leadership called me in. No warning, no explanation, just a request. I sat across from two officers who didn't smile much. They asked about my background, but not in the way I expected. They already knew the basics. They wanted context, decisions, growth. I told them the truth, not a sob story, not a defense, just facts. I owned my mistakes. I talked about what I learned, about discipline being something I built, not something I was born into, about why structure mattered to me, about why I never cut corners. They listened. Then they asked about the veteran. That caught me off guard, not in a scary way, in a revealing one. They wanted my perspective on his leadership style, his decisions, his treatment of others. They didn't prompt me, they didn't guide me, they just let me talk. So I stayed honest, respectful, balanced. I acknowledged his experience, his contributions, and then I spoke about patterns, about pressure used selectively, about public commentary that blurred professionalism, about moments where reputation seemed to matter more than performance. I wasn't trying to bury him, I was just done protecting him. When I walked out of that room, I knew something had changed, not because I felt powerful, because I felt lighter, like I'd finally put something down I wasn't meant to carry. After that, the veteran's behavior shifted again. He stopped singling me out, not out of respect, but caution. He kept things by the book, almost too much, like he knew the margins were gone, like he understood eyes were on him now, measuring the same way he'd measured me. Others noticed it too. The jokes stopped, the whispers faded, conversations around me shifted back to training, tasks, normal stuff. I wasn't a question mark anymore, I was just another soldier doing the job. And that bothered him more than anything else, because without my past to point at, all that was left was comparison. There was one afternoon, late, quiet, when we crossed paths alone. No audience, no ranks between us, just two people in uniform. He looked tired, older somehow. He didn't say much, just asked how I was holding up. I told him I was fine. That was it. No apology, no confrontation, just distance. And that told me everything. He knew the ground had shifted. He just didn't know how far yet.
The twist wasn't that I'd outperformed him. The twist was that the story he built about me had collapsed under its own weight. My past didn't disqualify me, it highlighted my growth, and his reliance on reputation, that started looking like a liability. What I didn't know yet was that the real confrontation wasn't coming from anger or revenge, it was coming from exposure, and that kind of reckoning doesn't stay contained for long.
Once the balance shifted, it didn't slam back into place. It tilted, slowly, uncomfortably, like a table you know is uneven, but nobody wants to admit it yet. I could feel it in the way conversations paused when the veteran walked in how leadership started asking follow-up questions instead of taking first answers, in how decisions suddenly needed justification instead of reputation. That kind of environment makes people nervous. I stayed steady. Same routine, same discipline, same low profile. That was important. When pressure builds, the person who changes first usually gives themselves away. I wasn't about to be that person. I didn't need to push. Momentum was already doing the work. The veteran, on the other hand, started tightening his grip. He took on more oversight than necessary, inserted himself into situations he used to delegate, corrected people mid-task, sometimes slowing things down instead of helping. It wasn't malicious, it was insecurity, the kind that shows up when someone feels their authority slipping and doesn't know how to stabilize it. And then came his final move. We were scheduled for a high-visibility joint exercise, outside observers, cross-unit coordination, the kind of thing that sticks in records and gets talked about later. Preparation mattered, precision mattered, mistakes wouldn't stay local. He placed himself in a leadership role he hadn't originally planned to take, and he placed me directly under him, not because it made sense on paper, because it put control back in his hands. I understood what he was doing immediately. If something went wrong, proximity meant implication. If I hesitated, it would validate his narrative. If I spoke up, it could be framed as insubordination. It was clean, strategic, and risky. That's the thing about last moves. They usually are. I didn't react. I accepted the assignment. I asked clarifying questions. I prepared exactly the way I always did. I documented everything. Timelines, roles, decision points. I made sure there was a trail, not because I expected failure, but because I expected pressure. The night before the exercise, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, from awareness. Every detail played through my head. Contingencies, variables, human factors. I wasn't trying to outshine anyone. I was trying to make sure the mission didn't become collateral damage in someone else's power struggle. The morning came fast. As we moved into position, I watched the veteran closely. He was sharp, focused, but there was an edge to him I hadn't seen before. He was talking more than usual, giving instructions that overlapped, correcting things that didn't need correcting. It slowed the flow. I made adjustments quietly, passed information cleanly, kept my team aligned. I didn't contradict him publicly. I didn't challenge authority. I filled gaps where they appeared. Then pressure hit. A variable changed mid-exercise. Not a failure, just something unexpected, the kind of thing training is designed to handle. The veteran hesitated, just a beat, long enough to matter. He gave an instruction that conflicted with the plan he'd approved earlier. I saw it immediately. I had a choice. Follow the instruction and risk the scenario degrading, or speak up and risk being seen as challenging him in front of observers. Both had consequences. Both would define the outcome in different ways. So I did the only thing that made sense. I requested clarification. Calm, clear, professional. No tone, no accusation, just facts. I referenced the plan, the timeline, the impact. I didn't say he was wrong. I asked which priority he wanted executed. That moment stretched. Everyone was watching now, not just us, evaluators, leadership, external observers. The room felt smaller, hotter. The veteran looked at me, and for the first time there was no smirk, no confidence, just calculation. He doubled down. He told me to execute his instruction. I acknowledged it, and then the scenario started slipping exactly the way the plan said it would if that path was taken. Not a disaster, but inefficient, messy, recoverable, but noticeable. I adjusted again to stabilize it. We completed the exercise. Barely. Silence followed. Debrief was scheduled immediately. That's never a good sign.
We sat down and the questions started coming, neutral at first, then specific. Why was that decision made? What information was available at the time? What alternatives existed? The veteran answered first. His explanation leaned on experience again, on instinct, on seeing similar situations before. It wasn't wrong, it just wasn't complete. Then they asked me. I didn't contradict him, I didn't accuse him. I walked through the plan, the change, the clarification I requested, the instruction I spoke like someone explaining weather. Facts don't get emotional. The room went quiet. One of the evaluators asked why I requested clarification instead of just executing without question. I said because conflicting instructions under pressure cause confusion, and confusion costs time. Time costs outcomes. No drama, no edge, just truth. The veteran stared straight ahead. That was the moment I knew the confrontation had already happened. Not in a fight, not in a blow-up, in exposure, in front of people who mattered, in a setting where reputation couldn't talk louder than reality. He tried to regain control afterward, spoke up, clarified, added context, but the tone had shifted. People weren't nodding automatically anymore. They were thinking, comparing, writing. When it ended, no one said much. We were dismissed professionally, calmly, too calmly. As I walked away, I felt something I didn't expect. Relief. Not satisfaction, not victory. Relief. Because I hadn't compromised who I was to survive someone else's insecurity. I hadn't lashed out. I hadn't stayed silent either. I'd done my job. Clean. I knew what was coming next. Formal reviews, conversations behind closed doors, decisions made without either of us in the room. The system turning the way systems do when evidence stacks up. The veteran knew it too. I saw it in how he didn't look at me anymore. The confrontation wasn't over, but the outcome? That was already writing itself.
The real confrontation didn't come with raised voices or slammed doors. It came wrapped in professionalism, which somehow made it heavier, harder to dodge, harder to spin. When systems decide to act, they don't need drama. They just need patterns. The next few days felt stretched thin, like time was moving but slower around us. The veteran kept his distance. No more tests, no more pressure plays. He stayed formal, almost stiff, like every word was being measured before it left his mouth. That alone told me more than any argument ever could. Leadership started calling people in one by one, quietly. Not just me, others too. Team members, observers, evaluators. Nobody talked about it openly, but everyone felt it. The air buzzed with speculation, with that uncomfortable awareness that something important was being decided somewhere out of sight. When they called me in again, I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. They asked me to walk through the joint exercise one more time, not just what happened, but why I made the choices I did. I explained it the same way I always had, calm, structured, no emotion layered over facts. I talked about risk management, about clarity under pressure, about responsibility flowing both directions, up and down the chain. They asked how I felt working under the veteran. That question landed differently. I took a breath before answering, not to soften anything, to keep it clean. I said I respected his experience, that I learned from watching him, and that I believed leadership works best when accountability is consistent. I said inconsistency creates confusion, and confusion creates mistakes. I didn't name him as the problem, I described the environment. That's the thing people underestimate. You don't have to accuse someone to expose what they've been doing. You just have to describe reality clearly enough that everyone else can see it. When I walked out, I passed him in the hallway. For the first time since this all started, he looked at me without that edge. No smirk, no calculation, just something tired, something defensive. He nodded once, I nodded back. Nothing else needed to be said. The confrontation reached its peak during a formal review session. Both of us present, neutral faces at the table, notes already taken, decisions already leaning one direction or another. This wasn't a trial, it was a reckoning. They talked about leadership under pressure, about adaptability, about how authority functions when challenged by reality instead of theory. They referenced the exercise without naming names at first. Then they did.
They addressed the veteran directly, asked him to explain his decision-making process during the critical moment, asked how he weighed input from subordinates, asked how he handled conflicting information under observation. He answered, calm, measured, but there were cracks. He leaned on his past again, his deployments, his years, his instincts, and for the first time, it didn't land the way he expected. One of the officers asked him a simple question. How do you ensure your experience doesn't blind you to new information? That question hung there. He answered, but it wasn't enough. You could feel it. The room wasn't hostile. It was disappointed. That's worse. Then they turned to me. They asked why I spoke up when I did, why I didn't escalate, why I didn't stay silent either. I told them the truth. I said silence can protect people, but it can also endanger missions. I said respect doesn't mean compliance when clarity is at risk. I said my job wasn't to look right, it was to do right. That was it. No speeches, no accusations, just values laid out plain. The decision didn't come immediately. They don't do it that way. But the outcome became clear in the days that followed. The veteran was reassigned, not punished publicly, not humiliated, just removed from the position where his behavior could do damage. Leadership framed it as restructuring, professional development, a chance to refocus. He lost his platform, and people noticed. The power dynamics snapped quietly, conversations shifted, training flowed smoother, decisions became collaborative again. The tension that had wrapped itself around everything slowly unraveled. No one congratulated me, no one needed to. Respect showed up in smaller ways, being listened to, being trusted, being treated like what I'd earned the right to be, a soldier. The veteran and I crossed paths one last time before he left the unit. No audience, no rank games, just two people standing in a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and routine. He spoke first. He said he underestimated me. Not my skills, my restraint. He said he thought pressure would expose weakness. Instead, it exposed habits he hadn't questioned in years. He didn't apologize, not fully, but he acknowledged the truth. I told him I never wanted to take anything from him. I just wanted space to stand on my own. He nodded. That was it. No victory speech, no dramatic ending, just closure. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt. Revenge, the way people imagine it, didn't show up. There was no rush, no celebration, just a steady calm, like something heavy I'd been carrying for a long time finally got set down. The confrontation didn't make me stronger. It revealed that I already was, and for the first time since I put on that uniform, I felt like my past had finally stopped speaking for me.
When the dust settled, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like quiet. The kind that comes after something heavy moves out of the room and leaves space behind. No announcements were made, no speeches. People just adjusted. Routines shifted back into place, smoother this time, like a machine that finally got realigned. The veteran's absence was noticeable, but not in the way you'd expect. Things didn't fall apart, they didn't slow down. If anything, the unit felt lighter. Communication cleaned itself up. Decisions flowed without tension. People started speaking more openly during planning, instead of waiting to be told what to think. And I noticed something else. Eyes weren't on me anymore. Not in that measuring way, not waiting for me to mess up. I blended into the unit the way I always should have. Not invisible, just normal, trusted, included. The kind of acceptance that doesn't announce itself, but changes everything. At first, I didn't know what to do with that. For so long, I'd been braced for impact, watching angles, calculating tone, managing perception. When all of that faded, it felt strange, like standing still after running for miles. My body knew how to stay tense better than it knew how to relax. Respect showed up in quiet moments. Someone asking my opinion during planning, someone backing my call without hesitation, a junior soldier coming to me with a question instead of going around me. These weren't victories, they were confirmations. I'd earned my place. I thought revenge would feel louder, sharper, more satisfying. Instead, it felt like relief mixed with something close to sadness.
Not for him, exactly, for the wasted time, for how easily insecurity can turn into cruelty when nobody checks it. I caught myself thinking about the veteran more than I wanted to admit, not with anger, with curiosity. How long had he been operating like that? How many others had been quietly pushed down so he could stay comfortable on top? How many times had his experience gone unchallenged simply because it was easier that way? That line of thinking scared me a little, because it forced me to look inward. I asked myself hard questions during that period, about power, about authority, about what kind of leader I wanted to be if I ever wore that responsibility. I promised myself something important. I would never use someone's past as a weapon. I would never mistake silence for weakness, and I would never let experience turn into entitlement. My past didn't disappear after all this. It just stopped being a liability. It became context, something that informed how I led, how I listened, how I read rooms. It gave me patience, awareness, a deep respect for what people carry without advertising it. People started opening up around me too. Quiet conversations, late-night talks, stories that sounded familiar in different packaging. Trauma doesn't wear the same uniform, but it recognizes itself. I realized then that this wasn't just about me anymore. The system didn't change overnight. It never does. But a message had landed. Not officially, not in policy, in culture. That reputation doesn't excuse behavior. That questioning decisions isn't disrespect. That pressure doesn't justify demeaning people. And I was part of that message, whether I wanted to or not. There were moments I replayed everything, wondering if I could have handled it differently, softer, faster, louder. But every time I did, I came back to the same truth. I didn't compromise myself. I didn't lose control. I didn't become the thing they expected me to be. That mattered more than winning. One afternoon, during a routine training session, I caught my reflection in a window. Same uniform, same rank, same face. But something in my posture had changed. I stood easier, more grounded, like I finally believed I belonged there. Belonging is dangerous when you've lived without it. You don't trust it at first. You wait for it to be taken away. But over time, it settles, becomes part of you. That's what happened. The revenge everyone imagines, the dramatic fall, the public humiliation, never came. And I'm glad it didn't. What happened instead was cleaner, stronger. It corrected something without destroying anyone in the process. That's real power. I stopped thinking about my past as something I had to outrun. It wasn't chasing me anymore. It was walking beside me, quieter now, no longer shouting over who I was becoming. And I knew the story wasn't over yet. There was still one thing left. Meaning.
People think revenge is about taking something back. Dignity, respect, power. But standing on the other side of it now, I know that's not really true. Revenge isn't about taking. It's about refusing to be reduced. It's about deciding who gets to define you and who doesn't. For a long time, I believed my past was a shadow I'd always have to explain, a stain I'd have to work twice as hard to wash out. Every room I walked into, I expected it to show up before I did, and for a while, it did. People used it as a shortcut, a way to avoid really seeing me. What I learned through all of this is simple, but it isn't easy. Your past doesn't vanish just because you grow, but it also doesn't get to speak louder than your actions. The veteran never asked about my story. He assumed it. He filled in the blanks with his own fears, his own need to stay untouchable. And in doing that, he stopped growing. Experience can either sharpen you or freeze you. The difference is humility. That's the lesson he learned too late. I didn't win because I was tougher or louder or more aggressive. I won because I stayed disciplined when it would have been easier to explode. I stayed factual when it would have felt better to attack. I trusted the process when everything in me wanted to burn it down and start swinging. That's not weakness. That's control. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt judged by where you came from, hear me when I say this.
The people who mock your past are usually terrified of their future. They cling to titles, years, and labels because without them, they'd have to actually compete in the present. Don't give them the reaction they're fishing for. Give them consistency. Give them patience. Give them proof. I didn't need to destroy him to prove my worth. I just needed to stop shrinking. The moment I stood fully in who I was, the truth handled the rest. That's what people don't tell you about revenge. The cleanest kind doesn't leave blood on the floor. It leaves clarity in the room. It exposes patterns. It forces accountability. And it lets everyone move forward without pretending nothing happened. I carry my past with me now without shame. Not because it was pretty, but because I survived it. Because it taught me things no manual ever could. Because it made me alert when others got comfortable. Because it trained me to stay calm when pressure hit and egos started shaking. If I ever lead others, really lead them, I'll remember this chapter more than any success story. I'll remember how easy it is to misuse authority, how dangerous unchecked confidence can be, and how powerful quiet resilience really is. The veteran didn't lose everything. He lost a position, an illusion, a sense of being untouchable, and that was enough. Sometimes consequences don't need to be loud to be effective. They just need to be real. As for me, I didn't get a medal for this. No applause, no dramatic closure. What I got was better. I got peace. I got respect that wasn't borrowed from sympathy or fear. I got the freedom to walk into a room and be seen for who I am now, not who I was forced to be back then. That's the kind of ending that sticks. So if someone's mocking your past right now, laughing like they've already decided how your story ends, let them. Keep your head down. Do the work. Learn everything you can. Watch carefully, and when the moment comes, and it always comes, don't react. Respond. Because one day they'll realize something too late. Your past didn't make you weak. It made you dangerous in all the right ways. And that's a truth nobody can take from you.